Good morning and welcome into a new episode of Big Talk. College sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar, and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler alongside Sam Sprunger. Sam, how we doing?
Oh, it's getting so exciting.
We are officially to the back half of Big Ten play,
Yes.
and things are really heating up because this last week has been interesting to say the least. With a couple of the top teams in the Big Ten Conference. Of course, last night, if you missed it, Nebraska came back from 19 points down to upset number 6 Wisconsin and pull off the win in what was just an unbelievable atmosphere. They forced overtime, and again, down 19, Sam.
That was the big thing is I was watching, various things and, various things going on yesterday during the day that I wasn't able to just sit down and watch it. And I flipped over and I'm like, oh, Wisconsin's up 23-8,
Yep.
and then, it went to the half and then, then it comes back and man, they're down 19. Then I went to bed. I accidentally hit do not disturb on my phone. So I didn't get any sort of notifications. I didn't figure that out until this morning. So I click on it and all of a sudden just all these notifications come up and I see Nebraska stuns Wisconsin. I'm like, no way. I didn't see it.
I think I read and I tuned away from it as well. Like I checked in at right about the same time you did. The 23-8, 23-9, I think was the score when I looked. And I was like, okay, I'll watch a TV show for the first time in my life.
As expected, you just figure Wisconsin the way they're playing, but I didn't even think because I didn't see where they were playing and Wisconsin was wearing white. So I just assumed they were in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
I should have known that Nebraska was going to do something when I found out they were in Lincoln.
When it's at the vault, all bets are off. That's what we know about Nebraska ball. But I mean, we talked about 19 points down. They were down 16 at halftime. And I believe Big Ten Network had the stat as a graphic that Wisconsin, since the year 2000, has been 120-0 when leading by 15 points or more at halftime. Now it's 120-1, thanks to that ridiculous Husker upset. And now, look, we're going to look, and it wasn't even Casey's night. That's the crazy thing. No, I know. Like, I'm all about the Tominaga fan, like jumping in on the wave of momentum that is. But that's the crazy thing. Nebraska pulls off that upset without one of their best players playing their best.
Right. Well, and that I guess would be the biggest thing that lends to them being pretty effective, at least at home. And they've got to figure it out on the road and in neutral courts, or they're going to be a quick out once they hit the tournament. But like, they don't have to 100% rely on Casey. Now they want to. They want him to be absolutely just, their guy, but there's going to be nights that their guy is not going to be the best. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And Nebraska wasn't before that game necessarily right on that bubble as like a last four in, but boy, does that win really lift up the resume. And I've kind of buried the lead here from the top, Sam, but we could talk a little bit about it with Mike DeCourcy because he's going to be joining us in the next handful of minutes. We're going to be spending some time with Mike DeCourcy, of course, great writer at Sporting News, does a great job with Big Ten Network, does a great job with Fox Sports. He does bracketology, in-studio analysis, excellent work wherever he's doing it. He does it in a lot of different places.
For sure.
But we're looking forward to that here soon.
Well, and he has, and I've got a question for him regarding your team of interest because I've seen different forecasts, and he's got Michigan State at a certain point. I've seen other forecasts to kind of Michigan State might be more solidly in than what a lot of people think they are, and even more, maybe a little bit more than what Mike's got them. But the fact remains is they're still in over some teams that are above them in the standings in the Big Ten.
Well, and you're right. Like that's going to be a great conversation with Mike DeCourcy, but I think that lends to why you play a tough non-conference, right? I mean, Purdue, your team of interest, has kicked it up a couple notches the last couple of years in terms of who they schedule in the non-conference, and it pays dividends, or at least it should. As Matt Painter says, I don't know how we could beat the teams we've beaten. Braden Smith puts up the numbers he's put up, and he's not on the Bob Cousy list.
Did you see the comment he made, too?
He made a couple of them.
If you think he's the 11th best point guard, I want you to coach in the Big Ten so I know I win 2 games a year.
he had that one, and then I read one a couple days before the Northwestern game, which we'll have to talk about as well. And
For sure.
about the list, and he said it's kind of like the Indiana high school basketball sectional. I think they just drew names out of a hat. And Braden Smith's name wasn't drawn out of the hat.
If there's anything that Matt Painter is good for, if you don't like him as his, in-game coaching or whatever, he has still got good sound bites. He's got great sound bites.
And leading up to the quote that you said of, I hope you get a job in the Big Ten so we can get 2 wins, he said, Bob Knight always used to say, basketball is watched by millions and understand by few. It was, he was.
Some of the point guards, and we're going to have to ask Mike, because last year when he was on, it was the question of, is he the freshman of the year?
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, should he have been on the Cousy Award, list? Now, I contend that he probably should have, but you also can see what's on my chest, so you're going to probably call me a homer for that thought.
Well, allow me then to cape up for Purdue as much as I don't necessarily love that position,
Gracias.
but I don't see the argument against Braden Smith. I have yet to hear any pundits even explain how that's a correct decision that was made.
Well, and I even saw a post, and forgive me for not remembering who it was or saving it, because they put Braden Smith's stats and said, okay, he averages more points than like 4 of the people on the list. He averages more assists, more or less turnover. He had better stats than, I think there were 2 guys on the list in every single category. Explain that to me.
Yep.
Explain that like I'm 4. And that's not me as like, honestly, if Braden Smith was on the list and somebody had that over him, take him off. Seriously.
And he's not the number 1 option on the team. And I think that makes it all the more fascinating when you put up numbers that gaudy and you're not the main guy. Like Zach Edey is the main guy. Don't lose sight of that. And Braden Smith then in that game against Northwestern has a nice response to get the win. He gets 16 assists, tied for the most that any Big Ten players had in the last 15 years, only 2 turnovers. And really played pretty well in that overtime win over Northwestern that saw Chris Collins get ejected from the game in front of a riled-up Mackey Arena crowd. I have some interesting thoughts on this one, at least I think, because I thought, Sam, this was one of the more iconic coach ejections I have seen in some time what Chris Collins had.
It rivals the time that Bob Knight got thrown out by Teddy Valentine, and he walked. The exit is to his right. He walked all the way to the left under the basket to cross in front of Teddy Valentine, and then walked out slowly to the. That one to me is the most iconic in my head, just because you knew he was doing that just to get into his, and you knew that Valentine wasn't going to engage. He was just going to let him do it, but he did it just to egg him on and walk away.
Chris Collins, as he's getting ejected, you've been seeing the memes lately of I gotta shake your hand, like going up to Matt Painter saying, oh, we're all good. Hey, good job on the win. It's some good stuff that's come from that. But and honestly, again, we've already established your rooting allegiances or fan interest is with Purdue. But the free throw disparity, 46-8. What did you take away from this? Because Purdue gets a pretty gutty win in overtime, but that free throw discrepancy, as Chris Collins said afterwards, look, I'm not going to get into the officiating, but I've never seen a box score look like that.
To me, I totally understand that, but at the same time, having watched, I watch most of Purdue's games, okay? Mm-hmm. And having watched, and I've saw it even against Northwestern the other night, the amount of times that Zach Edey is fouled and it isn't called, or they wrap him up and it isn't called, that discrepancy technically could probably happen every single time Purdue takes the court. But let's be, Boo Buie should not go free throw-less in a game that he scores 28 points.
Right.
I mean, that's so I agree to a certain extent, but at the same time, I could see that happening. I mean, honestly, if you called it foul for foul, every time, and if you were calling touch fouls or what would constitute a foul, Purdue would have that every time, because nobody can, like like Colin said, you can't prepare for Zach Edey. He's one of the best all-time greatest college basketball players ever.
Well, and it points to a couple other areas because you're right. I think just about any time Purdue's on the floor, they should, by their style of play, shoot more free throws than the opposing team. 46-8 seems a bit ridiculous. And in this case, it seems like this was a poorly officiated game. I think we can all agree that this was a poorly officiated game. But it begs the bigger question, I think, of how are you supposed to officiate Zach Edey? And I think it's a question that Big Ten officials don't really know. And I'm not even judging or condemning them for that. I don't really know what the answer is. How are you supposed to officiate somebody like Zach Edey? Because it is different.
Yeah. And that's the kicker is nobody can match him size and height. So you've got to be, aggressive and push, put some contact into him, put a body on him. And I totally get the refs letting him do that. But when you have shots, of constant, like multiple shots of different players that are guarding him that have him wrapped, like they have their arm intertwined into his arm, and he's still scoring 30 points. Goodness, come on.
Zach's a great player, no doubt about it.
He missed 9 free throws. So like he could have had easily close to 50 points if he would have just, been on, don't get me wrong, he shot over 25 free throws or whatever, but he missed 9 he left almost 10 points on the board just from missing free throws. But yeah, it's a difficult situation because, he's not just tall. Period. I wrote an article about that. He's not just tall. He is doing things that most of us have never seen. Now, I wasn't around when Bill Walton, or I was really, really young when Ralph Sampson did their back-to-back years of Player of the Year. They may have been just as dominant. I don't know. But like this is something that we haven't seen in some people's lifetimes, your lifetime, probably my lifetime, that after he won Player of the Year, you assume that maybe he would still be pretty good, but he wouldn't have the same numbers this year. He's averaging more points this year. He's a little less on the rebounds, better shooting percentage. So like he has improved. We haven't seen this. So how do you prepare for him? You don't. You've just got to have a game plan.
Yeah, I was going to say there's that angle of how do you prepare as an opposing coach. And because you're right, and I don't want this to get lost in the shuffle because especially in all discourse that happens, not just sports, but in just today's society, everything becomes so polarized and so absolute. Like, look, Zach Edey's a unbelievable talent. Like he's a great player. You're right. He's not just tall, but he is also tall. And if I stab at it from how do you officiate Zach Edey, not so much from when Edey's being the victim, but the other players. Because look, Zach Edey at 7'4" catches that ball in the post. He goes to turn with his arm that seems to be 8 feet long and 150 pounds on the limb itself. Like that's going to move a defender out of the way. And so when you talk about like fighting for position all the time in basketball, a lot of it is the conversation of advantage, disadvantage. Did you displace somebody to create an advantage for yourself? That's often kind of how we gauge fouls in just the game of basketball. And I know you got a point, but my question just is, when somebody is that physically large where they simply can't really help besides just being a giant, that it physically moves people, that's, I think, the larger question of, what are you supposed to do in calling that game?
Well, you kind of, segued right into what I was going to ask you're allowed to have the elbows out as long as you're not swinging them. So if he's pivoting, those are big elbows coming at you. Are they going to call a foul every time he makes contact if he's really just pivoting? No. And there's going to be a lot of people that are upset the fact that he's not getting called for every time he makes contact. Well, guess what? It's not a foul every time there's contact, period. It's just the way it is. Contact doesn't always constitute a foul. It's when do you get an advantage?
Yes, correct.
And if he's not swinging, he's pivoting on it, and he makes contact and knocks somebody over, is there a no call or is it a defensive foul? Yeah. Because he's not doing anything to try to get an advantage, because you can see a difference between swinging and pivoting. You can see that. And that's what those refs are paid to do, is see, was he getting an advantage by swinging his elbows? Plus there's flagrant fouls that could go into play with that too then.
And officials, you're right. They do get paid to see that. And they normally see that in instances where everybody's human. Or at least D1 basketball like species. Zach Edey is a different breed, and I just think it's come along with so many challenges for officials. And again, I don't damn them for it. I think it's really an interesting question to kind of figure out how you officiate it. But nonetheless, Zach Edey with 2,000 career points now, 1,000 career rebounds. He's one of just 6 Big Ten players ever to accomplish such a feat. I mean, it's incredible what we're seeing.
It is, and he's not done yet. He's still got just under half of a Big Ten season, a Big Ten tournament, and hopefully this year a decent run in the tournament to where he can just keep piling them on. I'm not saying he's going to score 3,000, but I'm saying he could pile on a lot more because honestly, he could average 25 points a night easily. It's just a matter of is anybody else picking up. And I tell you what, Lance Jones, best acquisition, and yes, I'm going to call it an acquisition that Matt Painter's gotten through the transfer portal because he can score, but yet he doesn't have to make put a stamp on the game for him from him.
We talked about it earlier this year. Just his athleticism adds a dynamic that Purdue hasn't really had. And that doesn't just mean in scoring or anything like that. It means defensively, getting into passing lanes, being able to apply ball pressure where other guards can't. It means getting out in transition, the threat that he poses. It just changes things, the dynamics of Purdue in a very positive way that they need. Honestly, if Lance Jones is on last year's team, Purdue's probably playing maybe into the second weekend. Like that was the ingredient.
Right. And that's not taking it away from anybody that was on that roster last year. Not at all. And Purdue ran into that perfect storm of FDU playing great basketball, had the perfect plan, operated it. Congratulations to them still. Got Tobin Anderson a new job. I mean, he cashed in on it. FDU was the Cinderella darling. Great. This year, I think, is going to be a different story. It just has been different almost in every aspect except for going to Evanston and Lincoln.
Yeah, no, and again, Northwestern gave every bit Purdue could handle at Mackey Arena. And I suppose I'll ask you this as a Purdue fan that you are, Sam.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I do think that the dynamics of this team is different. But since you're a Purdue fan and you've had to tell yourself year after year that it's going to be different each postseason, I mean, on the spectrum of hope versus just defeated, how do you keep landing on hope so well? And it feels like Purdue fans do often too.
I'm a Chicago Cubs fan.
And with that, we'd like to welcome in Mike DeCourcy, who is waiting to join us here on Big Talk. Mike DeCourcy, of course, has some great work with the Sporting News, Fox Sports, Big Ten Network. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Morning, guys.
Are you a Chicago Cubs fan too? Can you relate to the everlasting hope that you have as a sports fan?
I grew up as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, so I don't have to worry about this stuff.
He's just a winner. Mike just showed up, put his rings on the table, and said, "Let's talk, boys." I
counted it up once. You got 6 Steelers, 5 Penguins, 2 Pirates when I was in my teens. It's an unconscionable number of championships.
Well, aren't you just a wonderful person of champions?
I'd rub it in your face a little bit.
I was gonna say, in the sports fan community, that's how you instantly become disliked, right? Like that's I win at everything. But we're having Mike DeCourcy on to talk Big Ten basketball. Mike, seriously, thank you so much for the time. I mean, we've talked about there's a lot of people that do some analysis of the conference and do bracketology, but we respect your work pretty much at the very top. We really love the stuff you do. So let's start talking a little bit about Big Ten basketball. Matter of fact, maybe we could start by going off the heels of the conversation we were just having prior to you getting in. We were talking about Purdue hanging on against Northwestern, and of course the conversation became about the foul discrepancy and the free throw discrepancy. And I think a big question, Mike, that we posed is, how are officials supposed to officiate Zach Edey? And we talk about the challenges that come with it because it's almost like he's a different species. I mean, can you kind of give some insight as to what those challenges are and why there's no universal rule on how you officiate somebody like Zach Edey?
Well, I don't understand why there's not. Why would it be different? Why is the standard any different for him than it is for any other player?
Well, can I pose what I was explaining earlier, and as to maybe the challenge being somebody who's 7'4", whose arm's so big, when he's just turning for a drop step, it feels like he's displacing defenders. And it's not necessarily like your normal 6'8" guy when he pivots and moves a defender. Like, he's just so naturally big. I feel like by the eye, and feel free to attack this point. But my point just is physically, he's just moving people really without intentionally trying to displace them.
Well, I think there are certain elements of his size that are different or create different issues, such as the fact that his elbow is basically at your nose.
Right.
And I don't mean my nose. His elbow's way over my head. But if you're a 6'8" or 6'9" or 6'10" guy guarding him, then his elbow is at your nose, and that creates issues. But in general, I just don't think it's reasonable to allow players to bang into him when he's got the ball in the act of shooting in the way that is. I'm not going to say always. I'm not going to say frequently, but occasionally you will see him make a move with the basketball that is a reasonable move, and see him connected and see no call. Much more than you see other players. Certainly any guard or wing you'd never see it, except maybe at the end of a game, which we saw in the Carolina game at Georgia Tech, or the Pitt game at Miami. We see late game on the road, a little bit different, but middle of the game, Zach Edey gets hit sometimes that aren't called, and other players would be called. And I think it was similar with Shaq, especially when he was early NBA, and he was just so quick that players couldn't deal with him, and the refs didn't know how much leeway to give him. But when you talked about him moving, he has that, what I call the cone of silence. You guys probably don't remember Get Smart, but he's got that cylinder. He's just like everybody else. This might be a little bigger, but he's supposed to have one too, and I don't think that he gets that at all. I looked at that game on whatever night that was, Wednesday night, I think it was, and there were more calls that could have gone in Purdue's favor and made the disparity even greater. I understood Chris's frustration from the standpoint of the Lance Jones non-call and call. I can't remember. I think it was. I can't remember which player it was that went down when he did the chicken wing hook.
The hook, yeah.
So I understood Chris being upset about that. And when you look at the numbers and then you add that in, I could see why he lost his temper, and totally understood that. But the disparity itself, Northwestern certainly attacks the lane, but they don't really attack it, other than maybe Barnhizer. Their players don't attack it to contact. I mean, because it's not how they succeed. I mean, Boo Buie excels by attacking the basket to freedom. He's either going to stop and do the floater, which is so hard to stop, or if he can get all the way to the rim and lay it in, he's going to do that. And it's true with Ty Berry as well. He doesn't hit the lane as much as other players. But when he does, he wants to attack it to freedom because he's not big, physical, strong. He wants to get the goal. And so that's what he's going to do. Now, Barnhizer's a little bit different. He can attack the contact and succeed and excel. And so he's going to do that. But that's not really who they are. So, they took more threes than Purdue took in that game. Usually that's a sign of a team that is not going to shoot as many free throws unless the other team makes a lot of foolish errors and fouls three-point shooters. So the disparity was wide. It's wider than usual, but again, some of that was schematic based on how Northwestern is going to guard a player like Zach Edey. It still worked for them. They played brilliantly. I don't think they lost the game because of the foul disparity. I think they lost the game because Purdue is significantly better than them, because they're significantly better than pretty much everybody. But on that night, they didn't play significantly better. They played a little better. I thought Northwestern's effort in that defeat was about as good a loss as you can have. To go into Mackey against the best team in the country, or the most accomplished team in the country at minimum, and be able to take that team to overtime, and then be able to take the overtime to the final 30 seconds. Really an impressive performance.
I was going to ask about Boo Bua. You mentioned last year at this time, that his improvement from the start of his career to that point was the greatest you'd ever seen, basically, in the time you've covered college sports. Has he improved even more?
Yes.
From what he was last year?
He has. It's not as noticeable because he was a first-team All Big Ten player last year.
Right.
But I think his awareness of the game, his awareness of the moment is greater. I can't explain why he wasn't able to get them going against Chicago State, but everything else that you see, he knows how to get them going in a moment, how to get them through difficult times, and he I don't think his numbers, if I look, I don't think they're quite as good as they were percentage-wise that they were a year ago, but they're a better offensive team now because I think he has a better connection to players like Barnhizer and Barry, and even when to involve the bigs. I think that Martinelli, guys like that, I think that he does a really, really nice job of running the team. And I think he is it's not a huge improvement from a year ago because he was great, but it's an improvement, and he's a handful for everybody in the league. Maybe the best evidence of the improvement is the fact that I talked about, that they went into Mackey in a game that Purdue knows they need to get, because they can't afford to fall 2 games behind Wisconsin. Even with Wisconsin coming up on Sunday, they know they can't fall 2 games behind. And they know that Northwestern can play, and they were fully. One of the things that I've wondered about with this Purdue team from the jump, when I went to their Xavier game, I wondered about their motivation, knowing what you guys were talking about before I got on, that whatever you accomplish, it's still, especially for you, because of what you've been through over the last 3 years, it's still going to be about March.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always wondering about their psyche, but I never wondered about them when they had a score to settle, so to speak. When they went to Bloomington, I had no doubts. And I had very little doubt. I had no doubt, really. And Northwestern changed my mind. Coming off the victory at Welsh Ryan earlier in the season, I thought that Purdue would be fully engaged and they would handle Northwestern. And instead, they had to fight them to the very end. I think that says a lot about Northwestern and why I think that Boo is a better player.
Well, Mike, you mentioned that Wisconsin comes up Sunday for Purdue. And I mean, you talked about it earlier that Purdue is the best team in the Big Ten. And I don't really think that's up for dispute. When they're playing their best, their ceiling's the highest. They're the most talented. But Wisconsin is right there, even though they lost last night in the vault in Lincoln, Nebraska. How is Wisconsin getting this done where they're hanging right at the top of the Big Ten? And really, I mean, at home in Madison, they could have a chance to retake the lead as we're in the back half now of Big Ten play.
Well, they're getting it done because they have really good players and a really good coach. And their really good players listen to their really good coach 99.9% of the time. Every team is going to have their moments where they don't. And I think last night for Wisconsin, those moments came early in the second half, where they kind of lost their connection to their system, to each other. But you got guys like Tyler Wall and Stephen Crow and AJ Storr. There aren't any teams that wouldn't want those guys. Now, they wouldn't want Stephen's performance from last night. He rebounded the ball great and wouldn't look at the bucket at all. There was a possession late in the game when he was in like a 2-man game with Chucky Hepburn, and the shot clock was almost gone, and Chucky got it to him, and I don't remember exactly how the exchange happened, but he got it to him, and then Chucky went down and took the defender with him, and all Stephen had to do is turn, and the basket is wide open. I mean, that was a 3-pointer, But they were late in the clock. It was the best shot they were going to get, and he didn't even look at the goal. Like, he's too good a player to not look at the goal when in a situation where he's unguarded. Tyler did not have a great night last night either. And AJ had a great night for most of it, but then late in the game was forcing tough shots. That's what I'm talking about, that they lost connection to their system, to each other. There were a lot of tough shots taken. And then, of course, some of the turnovers that they made were complete discombobulation. They got rattled. So that's an uncommon thing for them. But the rest of the year, they've had great connection. They fit their system around their talent. I think that's always been misunderstood about the Bo Ryan, Greg Gard approach. I think 2014 and 15 showed that they were willing to fit their system around their talent. Mm-hmm. And yet, anytime they get into a period where their talent is just above average or less than great, or not super dynamic, people say, well, that's how they play, and this is who they are, and how can AJ Store fit into it? And then they get an AJ Store, and they show how the dynamism works with what they do. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that when AJ finishes his career at Wisconsin, whenever that is, we'll be back into this narrative about how they play. It's false narrative. They play to the best of their talent. When they get elite players like they had in 2014 and 15, then they showcase that. It's just the way they operate is a little different than others, and so they're hard to play against because they're so good at that stuff. But if they have dynamism on a particular team, as they did in 15 with Sam Decker, as they do now with AJ and some others, they'll turn it up a little bit. It's not a preternaturally slow approach. It's just a patient, understanding approach, and build toward the best possible shot in this particular fashion.
I wanted to go to the other side of the court from that game last night. Nebraska, they are almost unbeatable at home. How is it that they are basically Jekyll and Hyde? When they go on the road, they don't win in the Big Ten.
Well, some of that schedule, they've been into difficult places. That's part of it. Eventually, you get to the opportunity to play on the road against some of the less accomplished teams in the league, the struggling teams in the league. And that's when you have to show that you can at least win some on the road. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important for Nebraska, is that when they get to those kinds of games, that they show that they're able to win. I'm going to look at the schedule real quick and see what they have that would fit that category. And it's somewhat limited. They have at Indiana, which is very dangerous at home, but then they close the year. Their last two road games are Ohio State and Michigan. We don't know where Ohio State will be at that point. They still have the capacity to flip the switch. Sounds casual, but there's a complete different side to this group of Ohio State players that we've not seen in a while, but it's still there. And they could recover it by then. But if you assume that they stay in the state where they are now, that would be a game that Nebraska would have to go in and win. Right now, they have one road win. They can't survive on that. They'll get in, but they're going to struggle to get into the top half of the bracket with one road win. So they've got some tough ones coming up at Northwestern. And then they've got the ones at the end against Ohio State and Michigan that may or may not be challenging. Several people have won at Michigan at this point. I think it'd be hard for anyone at Nebraska's level to justify not being able to go into Michigan, knowing what it means on the final day of the regular season and not get that done.
Yeah.
Fair. We've talked a lot about the positive stories there's been in the Big Ten, and I want to stay in this realm for a moment because, Mike, if I award you the precursor of it's February 2nd, this is subject to change. But as we're halfway through the Big Ten season, if you had to pick a coach of the year, somebody that you're impressed with. I mean, we talk Nebraska, we talk Northwestern, we've talked Greg Gard. And then there's a hint of Purdue still being at the top and sustaining a standard and an excellence. Where would you go at this point?
I probably would lean toward Fred Hoiberg if he is able to solve the road issue. He would be my leader with a caveat. I think if Greg Gard is able to win the league, either outright or share, I think that would elevate his candidacy. I think if they finish second, even a strong second, not sure I'd be as motivated at that point to vote for Greg. For Matt, he could win it a lot of years. He's built a phenomenal team. I think it depends on what the record would be if they win it. How many losses are on that record? Because for this team to overachieve in league or to achieve, they probably wouldn't be able to lose many more league games because they gave up the Nebraska one and they gave up the Northwestern one. I don't know that you could do many more and say that Matt has coached this team to date league-wise. But remember, again, for Matt, it's really not about another Coach of the Year award. Right. It's really about this time getting to Phoenix would be ideal, or at least taking your very best shot. I don't think the last 3 years anyone's going to say they took their best shot. I think in 2019 they took their best shot. They were one free throw away.
Right.
When people talk about coaches failing in the tournament, and you're one free throw away from making the Final Four, that's on the coach. I mean, he put his players in position to do the right things, and it just didn't happen for them. So I think that would be an obstacle for him. So I think it'd probably be one of those guys. Chris won it a year ago. For me, if I were a voter, and this is not one that I think I vote for, I do vote for all Big Ten through the AP, but I don't think I vote for this. But if I were a voter, I probably would say that most years it would be unlikely for me to go back to back with the same winner.
Fair. Well, by the way, since we're talking first team, and then Sam, you can jump in. Since we're halfway, I imagine if you had to fill out a first team, and again, subject to change, award you all the qualifiers because it's justified here. I imagine you go Zach Edey. I imagine you go Boo Buie, but where would you go from there? Ooh,
that's an interesting question. I think I would have AJ Storr on there for sure. I think he's been terrific. I would. This is another one I'm going to cheat just to make sure. I would probably have Braden Smith on there. Okay. I think he's been phenomenal. I would probably have him on there. Tyson Walker would be a candidate. Jameer Young would be a candidate. It would somewhat depend on how they finish. I would say that I would strongly consider Marcus Damask from Illinois. I think he's done a great job for the Illini. So those would probably be most of the candidates, I think. Nebraska has not had any one player stand above the rest. And Indiana, I don't think that the guys who on that team that, I think that Malik Renew's season is the classic second team all Big Ten season. Khalil Ware hasn't been healthy all the way through. So I think that has limited his ability to be in contention for that sort of award. But I think that that would probably be the group that I would have under consideration. And then, other than Boo and Zach, I think there's a lot of room for people to fight to get on there.
But those two are default. They're going to make it pretty much.
Something would have to really weird happen in the next month for them not to.
I wanted to go back, or I wanted to go up to East Lansing because you have, and I'm going to bring up the brackets, your brackets that you've got for these guys. You've got Whoops, I hit the wrong button. for Michigan State, you've got them at an 11 seed over in the Midwest. What in the world? Oh, goodness. Sorry, guys.
Oh, you're good.
There we go. So you've got Michigan State as an 11 seed. I've seen them as high as a 9 seed. They're below IU right now in the. I mean, they've got the same record, but technically, I guess the way they're sitting. But IU isn't even in this, and then yet I see Michigan State with a discrepancy of anywhere from an 11 to a 9. Is this just a testimony of what Izzo does in the preseason and gets them ready for March?
I think it says a lot about the particular bracket projectors' reliance on metrics.
Okay.
And there are people who are on the committee. I know this. That are very heavily into that. I think it can be useful to rely on those metrics, the predictive metrics. I think it can be useful. I also think it can be a crutch at times. Makes it easy for you. Well, look, Ken Palm says.
Yeah.
I think that there are times when that happens. And for Michigan State, though, there is such a dichotomy between their performance and their predictive metrics that they become a very difficult team to seed. But I have a hard time justifying. Look, that Baylor win is a really good win, but their performances have been inconsistent enough that I have a hard time justifying them at an 8-9 level. And so I would say that where I have them is where is where their performance has indicated they belong. And now their metrics say they're better than that. Okay, I'm willing to listen. You got a month, 6 weeks to prove it. And the metrics have said this for months. Remember the Northwestern game when they played so poorly, and Tom was complaining about the analytics. And I think I never asked him, but I think what he was complaining about was that they were saying nice things about his team, and then his team was going out and giving performances like the Northwestern performance, or to a lesser extent, last Friday's Wisconsin performance. Those metrics don't mean anything if you keep going out and getting beaten by double digits on the road, even against good quality opposition. You should be competitive in those games, and they largely weren't in the Wisconsin game. It's been too long since the Northwestern game. I know what the final margin was, but I can't remember whether they were ever really in that game. But they were never really in the Wisconsin game once it got cooking. Right. So you can't do that and say, yeah, but their metrics say they're one of the 8 or 9, one of the 36 or 40 best teams. It just doesn't add up. Or I should say 32 or 36 best teams. I can't see that. And I think it, like I said, I think it can be a crutch. And I think the people that are putting Michigan State into that place on the bracket right now are using crutches.
Well, Mike, look, we could talk with you forever. So out of respect to your time, I'm going to ask you about 3 teams that I'm really curious about here. One, to follow up on Michigan State, I had heard earlier in the season you were talking about some of their struggles coming from their post play. Has anything been able to boost your confidence in Michigan State and show that maybe come March that Tom Izzo's able to make this team go on a run if they do get in and stay in your field?
Well, I mean, if they have the capacity to make changes that they haven't made, but I haven't seen any significant improvement in the issues that we've noticed with the inability to run your offense at all through the post, or to involve them in perimeter big man activities like a pick and pop or a pick and roll. We haven't seen much success in that regard from the use of Cooper and Sissoko. We haven't seen much success there, and we certainly haven't seen it in those circumstances where you would play the big man in the post and throw it into him. And so on too many occasions, they're playing essentially 4-on-5 at the offensive end. And it really it increases the pressure on players like Hogard and Walker to excel. And I think it's hard for them to get much better if that doesn't change. Now, there are a couple different ways they could go. It's pretty clear they're not going to go younger with Xavier Booker. It's pretty obvious that's not coming. And I can't say whether it's warranted because I've not seen Booker on the floor for more than a few minutes at a time. And I haven't attended any Spartans practices. And I think Iz has been at all of them. So I give him the edge there. But another option would be to go small and play Malik Hall at the 5 and Cohen Carr at the 4, something like that. That would be an option too. And that obviously would have impact on the defensive end, but it might make their offense really hard to guard because they would be much more dynamic. You would be able to use Malik Hall in any sort of pick and pop situation that you wanted, pick and roll situation that you wanted. And you could throw the ball into him, even if you didn't intend for him to be a post option. You could at least be reasonably assured that he would catch it and have the ability to either bounce it, to keep it moved, to keep it and allow the other players to relocate, or to find somebody open on the perimeter as a cutter. So I don't think he's going to do that either. So I'm not sure how it gets better from here. But those would be things that he could do. I think that he's going to continue to go in this direction because why do I believe that? Because he spent 3 months going in this direction.
Yeah.
And so he clearly either believes that the other directions aren't tenable or that this one can improve or that he can survive it enough to get the ball in the hands of the playmakers and hope that they do good things with it.
Interesting. Mike, I'll ask you about two more. I'll throw both here in the same question. Two teams that are maybe definitely on the outside looking in by your bracketology. We talked about one of them earlier, Ohio State. Do they have what it takes to make a turnaround where they can maybe get into this tournament? And the other one, Maryland. Maryland started their 180 turn. What can we expect from the Terps the rest of the way?
You can expect from the Terps that no one will want to be in the gym with them. I'm telling you that defensively they started the year as a quality defensive team that really just struggled immensely on offense. And that cost them the games against Davidson and UAB and those sorts of people. UCLA, they were able to go out and win, and they started to get some of it back, but they still weren't themselves. But defensively, over the last 3 weeks, maybe, they have become the team that we knew they were. They have recovered that. I think their offensive struggles at the beginning of the year diminished them defensively, not to poor, but to less than oppressive. And now you have them back to being oppressive. So offensively, they still aren't elite. They still have some problems from possession to possession. But the game they played against Nebraska, I mean, if I were Kevin Willard, I'd show that as often as TNT used to show Shawshank. That's the game. That's the one, because they did everything right. Offensively, the freshman Deshaun Harris-Smith played totally within himself. Kaiser comes off the bench, shoots with authority and confidence. The vets are totally into their roles, and they were totally bought into that game. One of the things that I really was interested in, and it sort of really caught my attention, was that Maryland had an awareness, entered the game at, I think, 93rd in the net, and they clearly had an awareness once they got into a commanding position in that game. I think it was against Nebraska last Saturday. Once they got into a commanding position, I don't think they were looking to beat Nebraska by 40, but I'm pretty sure they were looking to not beat them by less than 20, because they already had it in that range, 20 to 25 range, and I think they fought really hard to hold on to that because they knew it would impact their net. And I was just struck when there was an offensive rebound available, and Dante Scott was up at the foul line. and he went flying in to contest the offensive rebound, fought it away from somebody. I don't know exactly who, might have been Rake Mast or whatever, fights it away, gets the ball. And then because he had to use the momentum to get into the play, he started to fall over the end line and he saved it back. It was just an amazing play. And it's the kind of play that would win a game if it was a game, but it wasn't. They were up 25, but it was like, we're not giving up this lead. So they have an awareness of their circumstance that I think is healthy, because they know that the effort has to be top notch just about every night between now and the end of the Big Ten tournament if they're going to get back to March.
I've got one last thing before we let you go, Mike. You mentioned Braden Smith, that you probably would put him on the All Big Ten team. The Bob Cousy Award list came out. He's not on it. How tragic is that, and how much of a snub is that? I know Matt Painter said, if you believe he's the 11th best point guard in the country, I want you to coach in the Big Ten. But how big of a snub is that?
Well, I think you have to look at the other players on the list. Are there any players on there that aren't really good players? And I don't think the answer to that is yes. I think they're all really good players. I think he probably got career achievement out of it because he's only been at it for 2 years. And you look at somebody like DeJuan Harris at Kansas, probably got it for career achievement more so than performance to date. Also team achievement. He's not having the same year that he's had in the past, but maybe there was an investment of belief in him that, Kansas is really good. He's been great his whole career. Maybe he gets it together in February and puts it on and goes down the list. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I am a voter for some of those awards. I'm pretty sure that you're not precluded from being part of the final list. Some of the awards are like, if you're not on this list, then you're out. I can't remember if that's one of them. Or those five are I should say that those are five of them, because there's one for each position. I don't remember. I hope that it's not the case, because he has played at a really high level to date. And has been among the best point guards in the country. But I would say that if you look at that list, whenever you say, well, he should be on the list, you have to say, okay, who comes off? Mm-hmm. And I would say, if I were doing it over again, I would say probably DeJuan. I would take off and put Braden in there. But what if DeJuan goes out and plays the next 6 weeks the way he played his first 3 years? Yep. I at that point, maybe he belongs again. I don't know.
Mike, they should just allow write-ins, because then you can figure it out. You've got the finalist list, and then, okay, well, Braden did end up outpacing some of these guys, and then
I don't believe that you should have a watch list that is a final candidates list at this stage. So I know there are some like that, and I can't remember what the Hall of Fame awards are, whether they fit that category or not. I can't. There are so many of awards out there that I can't remember whether they do. But I'm a believer that you should not be eliminated at this stage of the season. What if he averages 30 points a game and 12 assists? What if he goes Caitlin Clark on us?
Well, yeah.
Or K-State Tominaga, like in February last year. That's that's a good point. Well, Mike DeCourcy again with Sporting News, Fox Sports, Big Ten Network, does an excellent job there. And of course, he's also the winningest sports fan in the history of Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
We always, who knew? Just adding on to this list. But Mike, like we said, we highly respect your work, and we're incredibly grateful for your time here today. Thank you so much for being with us.
All right, guys. Thanks, Dalton, Sam. Good luck, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely. Take care, Mike. We'll certainly be following his work for the next month as we get closer.
I love his analysis. I really do. I love it.
And it's got such a nuance, such a genuine aspect to it when evaluating some of the different things with some of these teams. Like talking about Wisconsin, Crowley, you got to look at the bucket. Maryland shows fight even up 20-some points. I mean, there's such a human aspect to the coverage that he does that really seems to round it out, I think, a lot better than a lot of other people are able to do. He's a gifted writer. He's a gifted talker. And
he's been doing it for a minute or two.
Yeah, that's right.
So he knows what he's doing. He knows how to to maybe break that down a little bit more than some others,
Mhm.
and find those things. So, but yeah, I still amazing that he thinks that Boo Buie is better than he was last year, and he made that comment that the improvement from the year before to last year was the greatest jump he'd ever seen, and now he's even better than that.
Yeah. No,
Blows my
it's
mind.
And by the way, we didn't get to dive too much into the bracketology stuff. So sorry, Sam, because you put in
That's
all
all
that
right.
work.
I had
But
I had it up. We talked about some of it. It doesn't matter.
but to round it out, we didn't mention that Mike, as of now, has 6 teams in from the
Yes.
Big Ten Conference.
Yep.
We'll see if that changes. I mean, we talked a little bit about Maryland's prospects. Believe Michigan State can get a little bit further. I thought his comments on Michigan State and a potential of a March run were interesting as well.
Yeah.
But overall, 6 Big Ten teams in the tourney as of now. And like we said, Mike DeCourcy always does a great job. But Sam, real quick, before we close up shop, that leads us to this Sunday, Purdue, Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin. This is the big one. So before we close up shop, what we need to look forward to, as it's a top 6 battle in Madison at the top of the Big Ten Conference.
We were this close to having a team in that matchup going into a 2-game losing streak after Sunday. You realize how close we were? If Northwestern had pulled it off, one of those 2 teams would have a 2-game losing streak go after Sunday. But what I'm looking at is what Purdue should be doing is seeing what Nebraska did to get back into that game and win it. Falling back, it's not going to be a blowout. I would be shocked if one team won by double digits, because these are 2 heavyweight fighters that are going to just, thump at each other. They're going to do haymaker after haymaker at each other, and they're going to be good. They're going to land them too. You know what I mean? I don't know that it's going to be a high-scoring game, but I think it's going to be, well, yeah, you did that, I'm going to do this. Oh, yeah, you did that, I'm going to do this. And it's going to be a chess game, and it might come down to coaching. So if you prefer a coach over another, then there you go. I know everybody knows where I'm looking at, but my point being is it may be that in-game adjustment by a coach or something that turns that. I think it's going to be one heck of a great game.
Yeah, I think it should be as well. And it's interesting, in some of the conversations I had with some folks around the Big Ten, they don't believe it's so much. I mean, looking down at the headliner, which of course is always the front court when Zach Edey's going to be in the game, and how do you play that? But there's a lot of attention saying that, hey, the backcourts of these 2 teams are phenomenal, and that might be the deciding factor in this one. That, I think, I'm even more excited about the backcourt than the front court, which you don't often say in a Zach Edey included game. But AJ Storr, Chucky Hepburn going against Smith, Lawyer, Lance Jones. I mean, it's something else. It's going to be fun.
I can tell you, if Braden Smith has 16 assists, Purdue's winning that game.
16 assists, 2 turnovers. What a ridiculous stat.
It's absurd. It's absurd. It was 7-1 is his ratio. I mean,
8-1 there.
Or 8-1. Sorry, yeah, that's what I meant. 8-1.
Aren't you a teacher, Sam? Come on now.
I'm not good math.
No better way to close out and punctuate what has been an excellent episode of Big Talk. Sam, let everybody know where they can find us on the way out.
Yes, sir. On the TikToks, the Instagrams, and the platform formerly known as Twitter, it is at B1G_talk. That's B1G, not BIG, Dalton. B1G_talk. At Facebook, or go to Facebook, it's B1G Talk, Big Talk. Don't go to All Big Talk, because that's not us. Every week we are streamed live on the ASAP network. Then later that day, the audio version, podcast version, comes out through Lounge Media Group. If you must watch us, again, if you missed the stream and you must watch us, we don't mind. You just need to go to Spotify, because that's where our video is.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, make sure you check us out there. And of course, again, a big thank you to Mike DeCourcy for joining us.
Absolutely.
One of the great guys, down to earth, does a great job. A big thank you to him, and a big thank you to all of you for tuning in and joining us for this episode of Big Talk. I'm Dalton Shetler. That's Sam Sprunger. So long, everybody.
See ya.